Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Spring football is over and the team is back from France. Now we have to wait 4 long months to see just what kind of a team we're going to have. Joining us on our Game Day segment in just a few minutes will be Rachel Lenzi from the Land of 10. We'll talk about that trip, changes to the coaching staff, Shea Patterson, and much more. First, a few news and notes to get us started. As you know, we're on our summer schedule from May through August, which means 2 shows a month and a Michigan Man Extra. There is never a scheduled date for the Extra edition, but I will always give you a heads up on Facebook and Twitter before it airs. So our next regular show for May will be on the 23rd of this month. Baseball and softball are both wrapping up outstanding seasons. Softball clinched another Big Ten title on Saturday by mercy ruling Ohio State 8-0 in 5 innings. The Big Ten tournament gets underway this week for the ladies. Baseball is flying high too as they battle for a Big Ten title and then hopefully a return to the NCAA tournament. We'll have more on both baseball and softball later in the show on Quick Hits. As I mentioned at the top, spring football is over and the team is back from France. By all accounts, it was an incredible trip, a great educational experience, and a chance for these young football players to step away from the grind of their sport and just be students. Most of them will have the rest of the month off, then in June it's back for summer workouts and back to school to get ahead academically. My guest today says we didn't learn much this spring about what to expect this fall from this Michigan team, and that's okay. Sometimes we put too much stock in what we normally see of the team in spring anyway. We'll have to wait until Labor Day weekend down in South Bend to have a better idea just what kind of team we might have, and if we fixed our offensive woes in the offseason. Any way you cut it, it's going to be a big year for Michigan football. Our guest today thinks it's even fair to say it's a make-it-or-break-it year for the Jim Harbaugh era of Michigan football. Rachel Lenzi from the Land of 10 joins us next here on the Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. With us on our Game Day segment this week, back for another visit, is Rachel Lenzi, who covers our Wolverines for Land of 10. Great to have you back on the show, Rachel.
Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, and as we know, spring practice has come and gone, so now we begin the 4-month wait for the start of another season. In the last month, Rachel, I think a lot of Michigan fans have been talking about the Amazon Prime series, All or Nothing, featuring Michigan. Did you get a chance to see that yet?
Yes, I watched that right around the time it came out. I watched it it came out like late Thursday night, and it was very interesting to see how much it revealed about the program. You know, it's a very closed-off program. There are a lot of parameters set on the team, but I think it gave a very intimate, very real life, a little bit of a raw look at the Wolverines as well. And I think we saw, a few sides of people that we usually don't get to see, particularly I think Rashawn Gary, Wilton Spate, and even Jim Harbaugh. I mean, one thing that really struck me was when Sarah Harbaugh, Jim's wife, talked about, what happens after he loses a game, how he'll wake up in the middle of the night and scream out plays. And I said, wow, that's something you never think about that happening. Kind of, you look at life away from the field. And I think that's a very important part of college athletics and of sports that people don't get to see a lot of.
Another aspect of that show is we got to see a little bit more of Don Brown than we normally do, and he's interviewed in media situations. Quite the character, to say the least.
Yeah, definitely an outgoing, kind of a strong personality, if you will. He's very intense when you speak to him. That was no different when you saw him interacting with the team. The halftime speech he gave against Florida as well, and even just again his interactions, and people really feed off that inside and outside of the program.
Well, in the offseason, Rachel, we've heard a lot of people in and outside the program say the offense last year too complicated for a team so young. at least for me, I came away with a pretty good feeling that was right. That was a very complicated offense to run.
Yeah, absolutely. I got that impression as well. And it's one thing that when in the players and some of the coaches that we had spoken to, particularly the players we've spoken to during the spring practices, I think immediately of the offensive line. One thing a couple of the offensive linemen said, they said, one thing that Ed Warner, the new offensive line coach, has come in, he's really taken on our position group and he's simplified our responsibilities. They didn't use the exact words. They said, things aren't as confusing. Technique is simpler. It's just a matter of making this more instinctive, of seeing a play and doing it rather than taking that extra half second to try to figure out what we need to do. So that's very, very important. And one thing in the offseason, Jim Harbaugh said he was going to be what he called a self-scout of the offense. And, we saw that meant, getting, some coaches left, some new coaches came in, Jim McElwain and Ed Warner in particular came in, streamlining some of the responsibilities. And it's going to be very, very important to have that offensive grasp because the defense really carried this program last year. Maybe, in the last two seasons as well, the offense wasn't, carrying their weight. So this is going to be very, very important to find that balance. The defense cannot keep bailing the offense out.
No, absolutely it cannot. Another thing, I think an interesting aspect that came, at least to me, from the Amazon Prime series was about Tim Drevno. And we all know, whether you were a fan or you were covering the team last year, he got a lot of heat all year, especially as the season wore on from the fans, not only for the offensive line play, but the play calling. But it sure seemed to me when you watched that series again, keeping in mind there was a lot of editing going on, but it sure seemed like Pep Hamilton was much more involved with the play calling than Tim Drevno was. Was that your takeaway?
Yeah, I was impressed with Pep Hamilton, with his poise, the way he handled situations, the way he handled his players as well. I thought that I saw a new side of Pep Hamilton there as well. And one thing that really stuck out to me was an exchange between Tim Drevno and Pep Hamilton. I believe it was in the Indiana game where at one point I think it was Tim Drevno said to Pep Hamilton, I really didn't want to say anything, but John O'Corn looks a little, and I think Pep said jittery. Yeah. And I said, he had to me that was an example, he's got a really good feel of what's going on with this program. He understands that as well. And again, I walked away from that after watching that series, again, very impressed with Pep Hamilton's poise as a coach and as a coordinator.
Well, of course, the team got back from France last week, and while it didn't get the coverage of last year's trip to Rome, I think, again, a great educational and bonding experience for the team. That's what everyone says. And that really is, after all, the point of these adventures, isn't it, Rachel?
Well, it's one thing. Jim Harbaugh, he designed those overseas trips, much like the satellite camps, as a recruiting tool, as a way to draw attention to the program. When Jim Harbaugh came in 2015, let's be real. The program really needed a shot in the arm. They 5-7 in 2014, 7-6 in 2013. 2012 is the end of the Denard Robinson era. Things have gotten stale. 5-7, unacceptable in this program. Jim Harbaugh came in and changed up the energy of this program in so many different ways. Some ways that made people kind of question, is he bending the rules? Is he doing this? Everything he did was in the rules, and he pushed the envelope just enough to, make people take notice. And I thought that was a very, very shrewd move on Jim Harbaugh's part. The other thing we have to look at, Michigan has these kind of resources to do that. But he thanks the two donors. I can't remember the names off the top of their heads. If you look at the endowment, if you look at the money that comes into that program, I mean, Jim Harbaugh is doing a great job of taking advantage of the fact that while football isn't the vehicle, it's the key that turns the ignition that gets people to notice. The rest of the University of Michigan. It's really become that. He's done a very, very good job of doing that.
As you mentioned, he did mention the two donors who put up for this year's trip, and he said they have committed to, I don't know if just next year, future trips, but it is going to be an ongoing thing as far as Coach Harbaugh is concerned.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm actually just looking this up right now. It was Bobby Kotick, I believe his name is, and Don Graham. They were one is a video game tycoon, as it had been reported, and the other one is a software engineer who is involved in gaming as well. So it's nice to have those at their disposal as well. But the other thing, I think it also creates a little bit, if you look at the haves and have-nots. What other programs would be able to do this kind of trip? I think we're going to see more of a separation as well too. Michigan did a very good job of establishing itself. They want to be haves and now they have to go on the field and back this up and start winning games.
Well, in the last couple of weeks, of course, we've learned that Shea Patterson has been cleared to play. He is eligible, and most fans and a lot of national observers have pretty much given him the job. Do you think that's jumping the gun right now, Rachel?
From in the court of public opinion, I don't think it's jumping the gun because Shea Patterson is probably one of the most dynamic quarterbacks that Michigan has brought in a while. There's a reason people are getting excited about him. He had 3,100 yards, about 23, 24 touchdowns in 10 games over 2 seasons at Ole Miss. The part that gives me pause is he had sustained a PCL injury last year that prematurely ended his season at Ole Miss. And of course, there is a question of how is he going to recover from that. From what we've been told really well, his teammates like his confidence. His teammates, they love the way he's mobile and he's athletic and he can, find a way to extend plays even when it looks like they haven't. We have not been able to see Shea Patterson or any of Michigan's practices this spring, and Michigan did not practice in France. It was just a cultural enrichment trip, if you will. But there are very, very high expectations around Shea Patterson as well, and it also brings up a point that Brandon Peters, he's going to have to do a lot if he wants to win this starting job.
Well, I thought it was interesting last week. One of your colleagues, Chris Howard, wrote a piece in Land of 10 that came to the conclusion Michigan would have been 11-1 if Shea Patterson was the quarterback last year. I think the only loss he thought, even if Shea played, would have still been a loss was Penn State. Do you sort of buy into that theory?
I'm not sure. You have to look at also the different situations that happened. The offensive line, I think that, if Shea Patterson had been the quarterback, I think he would have definitely taken some of the pressure off the offensive line because he would have been able to get out of more of those situations. He would have been more mobile. But the same part is also there's so many moving parts involved. Again, the offensive line, that's the heart of the offense. That's everything runs for that. If the offensive line can be successful, it opens so many more doors. The pass protection wasn't great. Karan Higdon and Chris Evans are both acknowledging this is something that we need to work on in the offseason if we're going to make this offense run a little more successfully. But I do agree with that assessment. I do think that, Shea Patterson would have given this team more of a fighting chance. I don't know about 11-1 with all due respect to Chris Howard. And I think Chris is a great, I love Chris. I love his insight. But I definitely think they would have had a better competitive chance with Shea Patterson. But that's, again, that's it's hindsight's 20/20. Mm-hmm. It's all speculation at this point. It's fun to do that.
Yeah, it is. With us on our Game Day segment this week is Rachel Lenzi from Land of 10, who covers our Wolverines so well. Rachel, you wrote a piece in Land of 10 last week citing 3 areas Michigan needed to shore up before the start of the season. The first of those was the secondary, and it was a pretty darn good secondary last year. But talk about where you see the areas that need improvement there.
Well, you definitely the secondary, because if you look at how the season wound down, as the season went on, even though Michigan plays a man defense, they kept getting burned in man coverage. And there were issues. I think back to the Ohio State game where Josh Metellus had a surefire, we all thought it was a sure interception of J.T. Barrett down inside the 20, and he dropped the ball. And, Ohio State comes back and scores one play later. That's kind of a big example of it. And I think the fact that we saw the secondary wear down and kind of, lose its edge late in the season, I think that was a metaphor for the entire program. One former player I talked to said, we have got to get mentally stronger. We have got to close out these games late in the season. It's happened, twice, the last 2 Novembers, if you will. They couldn't close out in November of 2016 against Iowa. They couldn't close out against Ohio State. Again, they couldn't close out against Wisconsin in November of 2017, and that was after Brandon Peters was taken out of the game with a concussion. They couldn't close out against Ohio State. They couldn't do it against South Carolina. That's an area where Michigan really, really needs to improve. It's not just in one sense, but they have to improve that whole killer instinct, that ability to go in and step on a team's throat and finish out a game, because that is a huge problem that is plaguing Michigan, and it's becoming almost I don't want to say epidemic because that's not the right a definition, but it's becoming habitual.
Well, the next position group you mentioned was wide receiver, a young group to be sure last year. No shortage of talent to work with in that group, though, is there, Rachel?
None, no, absolutely none. They return everybody from Donovan Peoples-Jones. They'll get a healthy Tariq Black back. They've got Kakoa Crawford and Eddie McDoom coming in as well. And, obviously Nico Collins will return. Oliver Martin, who didn't play last year, will come back. So they will have a year of experience under their belt, not just youthful experience, but they will be able to, I think particularly Donovan Peoples-Jones, who looks a lot stronger. Everything that's been said that he's, the most improved wide receiver in practices. Again, this is what we've been told. We've not been able to watch any practices. You're going to see better timing from those players, better routes, more instinctive moves as opposed to just being thrown into the fire and say, hey, go figure it out on the field.
Well, another important aspect of that is now they have a position coach in McElwain, and some of the players have been talking about what an impact grad assistant Roy Roundtree has made. That's something they did not have last year.
Right. I like the hire of Roy Roundtree as a grad assistant because he can come in and level with those players. And he's about 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years out of school. He can come in, he can relate with those players on a certain level. He understands what they've gone through. I believe he was at Indiana State or Colorado State. I can't remember where he was before coming to Michigan. It was one of those two or maybe both. He's seen different offenses and can provide that unique perspective of someone who has been on the field very recently, who's been in different programs and seen how things operate. And I think it's nice to get those diverse perspectives when you're coaching.
Well, the next position group you mentioned, or the last, was something I think we can all agree on. It's that offensive line. You talked about it earlier. It needs to develop depth. It just flat out has to be better this year.
It has to be. Again, like I said, the entire offense, it starts with the offensive line's effectiveness, their efficiency, and their proficiency. And they will come back again, like the wide receivers, a year better, a year more understanding and movement. And the addition of Ed Warner, a guy who has seen so many different offenses. He saw the spread at Kansas. He saw the triple option at Air Force and at Army. He was an offensive coordinator at Ohio State. I think that's a huge addition because he's just got a great mind for working with offensive linemen. He can look at them, he can analyze them, he can simplify the game, and he can say, hey, look, here's what we have to do to all get on the same page and be effective. And I talked to a former Kansas lineman who said, Ed Warner came in and just whipped everything into shape and got us all on the same page.
Who's under center? Who's carrying the ball? Who's catching the ball? It's all going to come down to that offensive line. That is it.
Absolutely. And Jim Harbaugh had said during spring practices, the interior set with Ben Bredesen and Mike Onwenu at guard and Cesar Ruiz at center. Another area where Michigan really needs to look at is their tackles. We still don't know if Grant Newsom's going to be back this year. He still hasn't been cleared to return after sustaining a terrible knee injury in the fall of 2016. Right now, it could be Jawan Bushell-Beatty and John Runyon at tackle, but the other thing they need to do is really build depth at those positions, looking at the younger guys like James Hudson, Andrew Stueber, Chuck Filiana. And if something happens to Jawan Bushell-Beatty and John Runyon, those younger players who they'll be in their second year with the program, they may need to step in. So that's another thing they really need to do is cultivate depth on the offensive line as well, just the same way they do with the defensive line.
Well, another hot topic in the offseason, and I think especially after watching All or Nothing, was offensive coordinator. We got a good look at what happens in the press box and that communication between Coach Harbaugh and his guys up in the box. No offensive coordinator. It doesn't look like that's going to change again this year from what we've heard, Rachel.
And we don't know what's going to happen. Maybe Michigan's still in the midst of the self-scout. I asked Pep Hamilton a few weeks ago about the offensive coordinator position and how the play calling is going to be determined. And again, he said it's going to be a collective effort, much as it has been in the past couple of years under Jim Harbaugh, but that Jim Harbaugh will have the final say. One problem last year was that there were too many coordinators on the staff. You had a run game coordinator in Greg Fry. You had a passing game coordinator in Pep Hamilton. You had an offensive coordinator in Tim Dravino. And one thing that really needed to be done was streamline those positions, the responsibilities, the titles, and what people need to do, because if I saw three coordinators on one side of the ball, it would just confuse the heck out of me. I'd think, well, who am I supposed to listen to, especially if they all have different perspectives? It would be, too many cooks in the kitchen, if you will. But no, definitely, and while we don't know what's going to happen, if there will be a designated offensive coordinator or not, I think if you look just now how everything has been streamlined for, to kind of maximize the most out of this, I think that's a very, very good move. But I think it'd be very unique if Michigan doesn't have an offensive coordinator for the fall.
Well, we know the preseason magazines and other previews are going to be out next month, and the prognostication will begin in earnest, a 4-month period, it seems like. One of the main topics is going to be the Big Ten, I think, nationally and here in the Midwest, which has just got to be the best division in college football, Rachel. It is brutal.
Oh, absolutely. I call it it's called the Big Ten East Division. I jokingly call it the Big Ten Beast. And my personal belief is anybody who wins that division should go into the college football playoff. That's just my take. Especially if you win the Big Ten out of that division, you deserve to go in there. I mean, I think it's not just from, you look at Michigan State, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan. Look at some of the preseason teams they played. Oklahoma played Ohio State as well, and I think it was a couple years ago Oregon played Michigan State. So again, from top to bottom, there are no slouches, and these teams prepare like they belong in the national stage as well. I think I think that Michigan State and Penn State's renaissance was a wonderful thing for the Big Ten and for the Big Ten East and for college football last year as well. And I mean, it's Michigan has to find its place in there. They can't settle for second place. They can't settle for third place. And they certainly will not settle for fourth place in that division.
Well, final thought, Rachel, and that makes it a very pivotal year for Michigan football. And we've seen a lot of pivotal years over time for this program. But do you see this as a make it or break it type of year for Jim Harbaugh and his era?
Yeah, I do, actually. I think with the personnel Michigan has, with everything that's returning, with their schedule, with the course of development that everybody's on, with the tradition, the addition of Shea Patterson. I was jumping ahead of myself there. The addition of Shea Patterson, the streamlining of all the coaches, Michigan has to set itself up for success this year. And I think that is definitely what they are doing. And we're going to find out exactly how far this team has come when they play Notre Dame on September 1st in their season opener. I think that's a great immediate test for this program.
Indeed, I agree with that. Well, there are more questions than answers right now, not only for Michigan, but for everyone in college football. And we have almost 4 months until we to see the start of the season and what kind of a team we have. My guest today has been Rachel Lenzi, who covers Michigan for Land of 10. As always, Rachel, will be following your work in Land of 10 and look forward to having you back in the fall when we tee it up for real. So until then, have a great summer, and thanks for your time, Rachel.
All right, thank you.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, the number 14 ranked University of Michigan softball team clinched outright ownership of the 2018 Big Ten Conference title with its 8-0 5-inning decision against rival Ohio State on Saturday afternoon in front of a crowd of 2,490 at the Wilpon Complex, home of Alumni Field. Michigan, which reclaimed the league's top spot after a 1-year hiatus, has captured 20 of the last 27 Big Ten regular season crowns and 10 of the last 11. The Wolverines also locked up the number 1 seed for this week's Big Ten tournament. Freshman left-handed pitcher Megan Bobian, 32-3, winningest pitcher in college softball, was dominant in her second consecutive start against the Buckeyes, striking out 5 en route to a 1-hit shutout, her 12th of the season. Ohio State broke up the perfect game with a double in the 4th and added a walk in the 5th, but did not advance past second base. Michigan dropped the series finale on Sunday to Ohio State, 10-1. Now it's on to Madison and the Big Ten tournament. On Friday, we'll get the winner of the Michigan State-Nebraska game. First pitch is scheduled for 4:30 p.m. and the Big Ten tournament runs through Saturday. Michigan ends the regular season at 43-10, 18-3 in the Big Ten. Baseball has 2 games midweek, one against CMU, then in East Lansing against Sparty. They stay on the road this weekend, wrapping up the Big Ten regular season in West Lafayette with Purdue. They are tied for first place with Minnesota heading into this last weekend of play. Next week, the Big Ten tournament gets underway in Omaha. It has been a great season for Coach Eric Bakich and his team. They have a 29-14 overall record, 14-3 in the Big Ten heading into this weekend's action. If you get the show from iTunes, just a reminder, take a moment to rate or comment on the program, and as always, thank you in advance. That will do it for another edition of The Michigan Man. Don't forget we're on our summer schedule, so our next show will air on May 23rd. Have a great Wolverine week, everyone. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Until next time, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!